part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Full 40 College Basketball Podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network. I'm your host, Ben Billman, here to review and preview what is going on in the world of college basketball. We are about 2 weeks into the season, and so in the first half of this episode, I'm going to go over 4 teams that have been playing great basketball that are on the rise, and 4 teams that have not played up to what I believed they would and that are falling in the top 25. And then in the second half, it is almost Thanksgiving break. It's a great time to spend with family and friends. The NFL dominates when it comes to television viewership over Thanksgiving break, but we cannot forget all the holiday tournaments that take place in college basketball. In the second half, I will be reviewing a handful of those and who I believe will come out victorious in each of those holiday tournaments. Most notably, the Maui Invitational, which I believe is the king when it comes to holiday tournaments and has been for the last 40 years. So we'll get into that in the second half, but first, it's been a very exciting first 2 weeks of the season. Kansas still sits at the top of the heap at number 1. They have looked very good. They look like they have good depth, and Hunter Dickinson continues to look like a first-team All-American and potentially Player of the Year candidate. So no surprise there with the Kansas Jayhawks. As of right now, they are the best team in college basketball. But there have been a few good surprises and a few bad surprises as far as the season has gone so far. Most teams have played 3 or 4 games at this point, maybe 1 or 2 more before the holiday tournaments over Thanksgiving, but we can already see a separation, or at least seeing teams that were well prepared for coming into the season, and then some teams that might have some stuff to work on over the next couple of weeks before conference play begins. So first of all, let me go over the 4 teams that have played great basketball and are on the rise in the top 25. The first one being the Auburn Tigers. Bruce Pearl has this team playing at a very high level. They went down to Houston. It was considered a neutral site, even though it was played at the Houston Rockets arena. But they went down to Houston and got a big win over the Cougars. And Johnny Broome is playing like a first-team All-American. I knew coming into this season that he would probably be one of the best players in the SEC, but he's playing as one of the best players in the nation, and that is no joke with Johnny Broome. He is going to be a force all season, and he is a player that can lead a team to a Final Four. He is that good. As of right now, he's averaging 17 points, 9 rebounds, and 3 blocks, one of the highest block averages in the country. And so that win over Houston looks very, very good right now. They've moved up to number 4, and they play, as already said, in the Maui Invitational. This is a real chance for them to move up and be very successful, and I think they could be a team that could move into the number 1 or number 2 position in the country if they were to win in Maui. Now, that's a very tough field. I'll go over that field in the second half and who I believe will come out on top, but I think Auburn has just as a good of chance as anybody in that 8-team field. So keep an eye out for Auburn, but congratulations on a great start and the win over Houston. The second team that is on the rise, and I was not sure about this team. I had them as one of my a team of doubts coming into the year, and that is number 6 Purdue. They beat the number 2 team in the country, Alabama. Now, it was in Mackey Arena on Purdue's campus, so they did have home court advantage. And for those of you that follow college basketball know that Mackey Arena is one of the toughest home court advantages in the country. They pack that place out. It's loud. It's very difficult to win there. But still, to knock off number 2 Alabama and not just beat them, but beat them convincingly is a real honor and spectacle. And you have to give Matt Painter a lot of credit for having his team there. Now, with the loss of probably the best player in recent history in college basketball in Zach Edey, I personally had a lot of doubts as to where they would turn and if they would be able to find contributors that did not play significant roles last year. Well, as of right now, Purdue has a 3-headed monster that is leading that team both inside and outside in Trey Kaufman-Renn, Fletcher Lawyer, and Braden Smith. And even though they don't have the big man in the middle, they're starting to develop and divide up points and rebounds and assists very well. They're shooting the ball excellent, and they have a real chance now, I think, in the Big Ten to not only win that conference, but be considered for a 1 or 2 seed in the NCAA tournament if they keep playing at the rate they are. Now, they play in the Rady Children's Invitational, which is a tournament taking place over Thanksgiving. Their first matchup is actually a rematch of their Final Four game against NC State, which they won to advance to the national championship. NC State is a completely different team this year. I think Purdue cruises in that game. We'll see in the second half of this episode who they'll play in the championship and what I think will happen. But Purdue off to a great start and a real good opportunity to add a holiday tournament championship to their resume, which would be really, really important heading in to Big Ten play. The third team that is on the rise and been very impressive is number 9 Kentucky, led by Mark Pope. Now, we knew that Kentucky was going to be a new, fresh team with a whole new roster of players that had never played there before. But the question was, could the new coach, Mark Pope, and a roster made up of new players hit the ground running and be successful? Well, a lot of experts and media believed that, yes, they are a top 25 team, but I think they came out and shocked the world by beating Duke in the first 2 weeks of the season. The most surprising player and one of the things that jumped out to me the most was Amari Williams, averaging a double-double, 12 points and 12 rebounds. And Mark Pope is using a very deep rotation right now. Obviously, it's going to take some time to figure out the rotation and figure out who works well with who. But Mark Pope has opened it up. He's given a lot of guys a lot of chances. And that win over Duke is going to look very good at the end of the year. I still think Duke is the best team in the ACC. So if Kentucky can pair that with a bunch of conference wins in the SEC, this is a team that I think has a real chance to advance far in March. Now, Kentucky does not play in a holiday tournament, so their next big game is on December 7th against Gonzaga. And that's going to be a huge game for both of those teams. If Kentucky can pair a win over Duke with a win over Gonzaga, it's very possible both of those teams will be 1 seeds, and Kentucky could claim to have 2 wins over 2 of the number 1 seeds, which would be huge for them. So congratulations to Mark Pope and the Kentucky Wildcats. A lot to be excited about with that team and that program. And then finally, the fourth team that I have to give a lot of credit to, and I really had no expectations for this team coming into the season. I really didn't even expect them to be a potential tournament team. I didn't expect them to even compete in the Big Ten, but the Wisconsin Badgers came out and beat Arizona, another top 10 team, and now Wisconsin is sitting at number 19 in the rankings. Now, I still am not necessarily completely sold on Wisconsin, but a player by the name of John Tonje, a transfer from Colorado State, then attended Missouri last year, dealt with some injuries and some other setbacks. He is actually a sixth-year senior. He got a red shirt. He is now at Wisconsin and is leading the team with 24 points and 6 rebounds. Now, my biggest question with the Wisconsin Badgers is their rotation. They had a lot of guys transfer out, including Chucky Hepburn, over the summer. They have a lot of new guys on that roster, John Tonje being one of those. They've gotten a quick early start with that win over Arizona. Can they continue that in the Greenbrier tip-off with 4 teams that I'll look at in the second half? But if Wisconsin can come out and be successful in that holiday tournament, I think that projects them pretty well in a Big Ten that is fairly wide open, other than, of course, Purdue, who has made an early statement as well. So the 4 teams that I congratulate for getting off to great starts and definitely turning some heads early on: number 4, Auburn; number 6, Purdue; number 9, Kentucky; and number 19, the Wisconsin Badgers. So kudos to those teams. Now, unfortunately, it's not all rainbows and butterflies for all the teams in college basketball. And there are a handful of teams that I have to look at, and I don't want to say that they're in trouble. I don't want to question their ability or their opportunities the rest of the year, but there are some question marks now that I did not see early in the season or in the preseason that I really have to wonder about at this point. The first team is number 8, Alabama. Now, we just covered that they lost at Purdue. That is not an easy place to play. But the worry with Alabama is not just the loss to Purdue, but they've also won sloppy and just not very well played games against Arkansas State and McNeese. Now, both of those teams are pretty solid when it comes to the mid-major and low-major, but with a team like Alabama that has a goal of a national championship, you would definitely think that they would be dominating those games. A loss to Purdue wouldn't be that big of a deal, but close single-digit losses to some teams they should have destroyed raises a lot of questions about this team. Now, Mark Sears is still playing at a high level, but the contributors around him, I'm just not seeing many guys rising to the occasion. It's not panic time on the Crimson Tide, but I think they need to start figuring out what is their rotation, who is going to step up, and who is going to help Mark Sears when it comes to points, rebounds, and assists on this team. Now, they do have a huge opportunity in the Players Era Invitational or Festival coming up over holiday break. They play Houston and they play Rutgers, 2 opponents they already know, and there's the potential, if they beat both of those teams, that they could advance to the championship and play another high-level team. So a real chance here for Alabama to redeem themselves, but it also could be an opportunity to have a complete disaster early on in the season. That remains to be seen. They've got some stuff to figure out. I'm not too worried about it, but another loss or 2 in the non-conference play, and you've got to start wondering about their Final Four chances before they even get to the 2025 calendar year. Second team that I was very underwhelmed by, the number 12 Duke Blue Devils. I knew that this team was young. I knew that they had a lot of new pieces that were going to take a while to fit in. But the hype around Cooper Flagg has been so big in the anticipation that he was going to come out and dominate college basketball. He's still projected to be the number 1 pick in next summer's NBA draft. Maybe our expectations were a little too high. They lost to Kentucky in a very close game, but down the stretch, Cooper Flagg made 2 key turnovers and just felt a little bit out of place in that leadership role in that Kentucky game when the game was on the line. Now, it's not necessarily bad to be led by young players, but when your top 2 players, at least at this point, are freshmen, Cooper Flagg and Connor Knippel, both great players, but they're going up against 22, 23-year-olds, and they're going to continue to go up against that age of players who are experienced and in their junior or senior or super senior years. How are they going to be able to keep up with that pace and that focus of teams later on this season? Now, they do have 3 really big games coming up for them. Arizona on November 22nd, Kansas on November 26th, and Auburn on December 4th. Those are really do-or-die games for Duke. If they can win 2 or maybe even 3 of those, I've got to think that they've got to feel good about that, and John Shire has this team back on the right stretch, the right path. But a loss or 2 in those games, 2 or 3 losses, I think you've really got to now question, is that team a quality team when you've got 2 freshmen leading the way? Can they keep up a quality team and compete at the highest level, especially in March in the NCAA tournament? The third team that I have a lot of questions about now is number 17, Arizona. Now, again, the loss to Wisconsin, who I talked about earlier. Wisconsin is a good team. They always play solid under Greg Gard, so it's not the end of the world for Arizona. But coming into this season, I expected Caleb Love to be a top-tier performer at the national level. I had him in my top 15 players to begin the season, and I thought he had a real opportunity to compete for Big 12 Player of the Year. So it really worries me that in the loss to Wisconsin, he only scored 6 points and shot a very, very poor percentage. And that is very worrisome for the Wildcats when your 5th-year senior is not playing at a high level. Now, as just discussed, they do play Duke on November 22nd, so that is a big one for them, and they have a real opportunity to come through and be successful there. But Arizona's got to be a little bit nervous now, not playing the best, not having Caleb Love play at a high level, and now you're about to go into the Big 12 where you've got 6 or 7 different teams that are vying for a conference championship. That's going to be very difficult for the Wildcats. And then finally, a team that I am fairly nervous about at this point, and that is the Arkansas Razorbacks. John Calipari, of course, moved from Lexington down to Fayetteville, Arkansas. It is looking very shaky with the Razorbacks. They lose a game to Baylor in which they were never seriously in it, and their guard play at this point has been atrocious. That is the biggest worry with this Arkansas Razorbacks team, is that their 3-headed backcourt of Boogie Fland, John L. Davis, and DJ Wagner at this point have been very flat, and they don't look like they're on the same page. Now, I expect those 3 guys to turn it around and do pretty well, but there are so many expectations on those 3, and at this point in the season, they just don't look like they've handled that pressure very well. Now, they do have a game on November 28th against Illinois. That's going to be a big one. I think both of those teams have a good opportunity to prove their worth and to get back on track. Illinois slipped into the top 25 this week at number 25, and so more than likely we're going to have a top 25 matchup with Arkansas and Illinois next week. That's a big opportunity for both those teams, and hopefully the Arkansas guards can get back on track and be successful in that game. So the 4 teams that I'm really wondering about and have questions about would be number 8 Alabama, number 12 Duke, number 17 Arizona, and number 20 Arkansas. So those are the top 4 teams that have been great so far, and the bottom 4 that I have a lot of worries about. So coming up in the second half, I'm looking at 10 different holiday tournaments, which teams to keep an eye on, and who I believe will win each of those tournaments. I'll be right back.
Hey everybody, it's Sam Amico from Cavs on the Break NBA podcast. Be sure to give us a listen for all your Cleveland Cavaliers recaps, analysis, breakdowns, draft talk, free agency. The list goes on and on. Give us a listen, Cavs on the Break NBA podcast.
What's up, everyone? I'm Holly Wetzel.
And I'm Tybus Powell.
And we are your hosts of The Orange is Oranger, a Cleveland Browns podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network. We give you all the dog pound coverage that you'll need to get you through the regular season, hopeful postseason, and I'd say off-season, Tyvis, but is there really ever an off-season for this team?
Thankfully for our podcast, Holly, there really never is when it comes to the Cleveland Browns. Don't miss our breakdown of each week's matchup, game recaps, and any and all news out of Berea to feed your Browns appetite. As we know, Holly, dogs gotta eat.
Yes, they do. So hit that subscribe button and never miss an episode of The Orange is Oranger, Cleveland Browns podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network.
Welcome back to the second half of the Full 40 College Basketball Podcast. Well, if you missed the first half, I went over some underachievers and overachievers 2 weeks in to the college basketball season. So take a listen to that if you haven't had the chance. But here in the second half, maybe the best part of the year in college basketball, other than March Madness, of course, is the Thanksgiving holiday tournaments. This is a chance for a lot of teams to travel to fun, exotic, warm locations and get away from classes and campuses for a while and can compete against other highly successful teams for a chance to bring home an early season trophy and gain some confidence. We've seen in years past where this can definitely lead to a high level of success later in the season, teams rising from nowhere to win these. And this has also been a time when teams that we expected a lot from to fall apart and struggle. Most teams have played 3 or 4 games at this point, so they are still trying to figure out their rotations, who their main players are, and coaches trying to figure out what they have and what they don't have. But these are exciting tournaments. I have a list of 10 here. There are more than 10. Some of these tournaments are not necessarily made up of the most high quality or highly regarded teams, but the 10 that I have chosen all have fairly high level teams playing against other high level teams where the results would be pretty impressive with a victory in these tournaments. So first of all, the first tournament I'll look at is the Charleston Classic, taking place from November 21st through the 24th. There are 8 teams in this tournament. Miami, Florida, Drake, Oklahoma State, Florida Atlantic, Seton Hall, VCU, Vanderbilt, and Nevada. No teams necessarily here that look like they're going to be national title contenders at the end of the season, but definitely a lot of teams that feel like if the things go right this season, they have a chance to make an NCAA tournament appearance. Now, in this bracket, I believe that the championship will come down to the Miami Hurricanes and the Seton Hall Pirates, both teams that I expect to make the NCAA tournament, and they'll be able to make an early statement by making it to the final here. I like Jim Larranaga and the Miami Hurricanes to win this tournament, and this is going to be a big boost for them heading into ACC play with a real chance to finish in the top 4 or 5 in that conference. Again, that's the Charleston Classic taking place November 21st through the 24th. Next on the list, number 2, the UGK Legends Classic, taking place November 21st through the 22nd. A 2-day tournament with only 4 teams: Syracuse, Texas, Texas Tech, and St. Joseph's. The 2 winners will play each other on day 2, and I expect for that championship matchup to be Texas versus Texas Tech. Now, you might know, if you follow college sports closely, that as of last year, yes, Texas and Texas Tech were in the same conference, so this wouldn't make sense that they'd be playing in the championship of a holiday tournament. But Texas realigned to the SEC, and so now, instead of this being a conference matchup, it is a non-conference matchup. And 2 teams that have been in the same conference forever are now going to have to play out of conference in this tournament. I expect Texas Tech to win this game. Defensively, they're at a higher level. Texas is very good. They're well coached, but they're pretty young, and I expect them to struggle a little bit once they get to SEC play. I still think Texas will make the tournament, but I believe that Texas Tech will win the UGK Legends Classic. Next on the list, November 21st through the 22nd, the Baja Mar Hoops Tournament. And there are 4 teams. This is one of the best fields in the holiday season. And it's got 4 teams: Baylor, St. John's, Tennessee, and Virginia. 4 very well-coached teams that play at a high level. I expect all 4 of these teams to compete for NCAA tournament spots, and I really expect Baylor and Tennessee to compete for the Final Four. I have Baylor and Tennessee playing in the championship of this tournament. I think Baylor's the best team in this bracket, and so I am going to pick Baylor to win. Baylor really needs to win this tournament because, again, entering into the Big 12, they are going to have a very tough schedule. This would be a good chance for them to pick up 2 very quality non-conference wins that will help their RPI and their strength of schedule going into the new year. And I think for Tennessee, this will be 2 quality matchups: a win over Virginia, who is still looking for an identity with the retirement of Tony Bennett, and then also a quality game against Baylor. Tennessee has a real chance to show what they're made of with a bunch of new players on that roster as well. The 4th tournament to look at is the Greenbrier Tip-Off, taking place November 22nd through the 24th. This is a 4-team tournament bracketed with Pitt, LSU, Wisconsin, and UCF. 4 major conference teams, all of which come in with a lot of questions. Now, as we talked about in the first half, Wisconsin is coming off a big win over Arizona, so they have a lot more expectations at this point. And I believe that Pittsburgh and Wisconsin will advance to the championship of this tournament. And with the momentum Wisconsin has right now, I expect them to win. Out of these 4 teams, Pittsburgh and Wisconsin are bubble teams to me. If Wisconsin can win this, I think that pushes them pretty safely into the field at this point in the season. LSU and UCF are both teams that are building. I don't necessarily think those teams will have a huge season or be in the bubble conversation, but still quality teams that have a real chance here to play well and potentially pick up some quality wins. But I like Wisconsin in the Greenbrier Tip-Off. Now, the granddaddy of them all, the one that has been classically at the top of the holiday hoops schedule, the Maui Invitational, taking place from November 25th through the 27th. Always exciting, always anticipated, and this year is no different with a loaded field of 8 teams. Now, unfortunately, the Maui Invitational has changed a little bit. For those of you that follow college basketball closely, you'll know that Chaminade is the host of the Invitational. They have changed in recent years, though, and so Chaminade now only competes in the tournament every other year. This year is one where Chaminade is not participating, so we have 8 major programs in this tournament. Those 8 teams are Memphis, UConn, Colorado, Michigan State, Auburn, Iowa State, Dayton, and North Carolina. 8 teams from 8 different conferences. All these teams have to feel like they have a shot to win this tournament. All 8 of these teams also have to feel very good about competing at a high level, not just in their conference, but in March Madness. And I could definitely see 2 or 3 Final Four teams coming out of this bracket and the way that it's set up. But I have to go for the 2 teams that I believe will advance to the championship, Connecticut and Iowa State. Connecticut being the 2-time defending national champion. They look really impressive so far this season, and the expectations are super high for them again. Danny Hurley has this team playing at a high level again, and going into the Maui Invitational, I expect them to advance to the finals. And then Iowa State, who is playing at a super high level right now. You might even be able to say that they've been one of the best teams, if not the best team, up to this point in the season. I expect them to have a really good tournament, but I do think in the end, Connecticut is going to win this tournament and come home with the Maui Invitational crown in what should be a phenomenal tournament. Of all the tournaments, though, of all 8 teams, I could really see 6 or 7 of these teams winning, and it wouldn't surprise me at all. So keep an eye on the Maui Invitational and look for UConn and Iowa State to be the finalists there, with UConn winning. Moving on to the Fort Myers tip-off, taking place November 25th through the 27th. This is a 4-team bracket, and it includes Michigan, Virginia Tech, South Carolina, and Xavier. 4 teams that are looking to have their name considered a little bit more highly than they currently are. I wouldn't say at this point any of these teams would necessarily be considered for top half teams in their conference, but I do believe that Michigan and Xavier will advance to the championship of this. With Michigan winning, I really do think they will boost into the top 4 or 5 of the Big Ten, and I think with Xavier, a quality tournament here can put them in the top half of the Big East. So Michigan and Xavier, look for them not only to make it to the championship here, but to be 2 teams to keep an eye on as upset-minded and potential Cinderellas when it comes to March and in their conference tournaments as well. Next on the list, from November 26th through the 30th, the Players Era Festival. Now, this tournament is set up a little bit differently. They have 2 pods of 4 teams with sort of a round-robin feel to it in those 2 pods. And what is going to happen is with each of those 4 teams, they'll each play 2 games, which has already been designated as to who they're going to play. And then the top 2 teams, 1 from each pod, will play for the festival championship. Now, this one is just as loaded, if not more, than the Maui Invitational. This bracket includes Houston, Alabama, Rutgers, Notre Dame, San Diego State, Creighton, Oregon, and Texas A&M. I look through these 8 teams, and I think all 8 teams will be competing for conference championships, and I think all 8 teams have their sights set on the Final Four as an ultimate goal for their season. Having said that, 2 teams have to come out to make it to the championship, and I think those 2 teams will be Houston and Creighton. Houston, even though they're coming off not the greatest performance in their first game against Auburn, I do think that they're going to recover here and make it all the way to the championship game. But I am going to pick Creighton, which might be a little bit of a surprise, but with Ryan Kalkbrenner playing like a National Player of the Year candidate so far this season, that team with Coach McDermott looks like they're poised to be neck and neck with Connecticut in the Big East. And I think they pull a mini upset here in the Players Era Festival. They reach the championship and they win the championship. That will boost them into the top 10 or the top 5, and they will be considered one of the best teams in the country. The 8th of the 10 tournaments that I'm highlighting today, the Battle for Atlantis. This one is always a fun tournament, taking place from November 27th through the 29th, and it includes 8 teams, all of whom are from major conferences or conferences that compete for at-large bids in the NCAA tournament. Those 8 teams are Louisville, Indiana, West Virginia, Gonzaga, Oklahoma, Providence, Davidson, and Arizona. And while this is a pretty quality field with 8 teams that all feel like they have a chance to make the NCAA tournament, I think it's pretty obvious to me that there are 2 teams of those 8 that really stand out from the rest of the pack, and that's Gonzaga and Arizona. Those 2 teams, I believe, will make it to the championship game, and Gonzaga will get an early statement win over another West Coast team in Arizona, and that could set up Gonzaga early on to be the best team on the West Coast and potentially get them as the number 1 seed overall that would be from the West Coast. Gonzaga, Arizona, with Gonzaga winning in the Battle for Atlantis. The 9th tournament, the ESPN Events Invitational, taking place November 28th through the 29th. 4 teams in this one, 4 teams that are looking for some confidence and a real chance to make a name for themselves early. Those 4 teams are Minnesota, Wichita State, Florida, and Wake Forest. I believe that Minnesota, who as of right now is probably lower in the pack in the Big Ten, at least at this point, I think they can make it to the championship here and get an early statement victory in that semifinal to get to the championship. And then I believe the Florida Gators will get there as well. A team that's under the radar right now, not a lot of people paying attention to them, but I think they'll surprise a lot of people in the SEC this year, and I also expect them to win this tournament. I have Florida beating Minnesota in the championship of the ESPN Events Invitational. And then finally, the Rady Children's Invitational, also taking place November 28th through the 29th. There are 4 teams participating in this bracket, including Purdue, NC State, Ole Miss, and BYU. I expect 3 or maybe all 4 of these teams to compete for NCAA tournament positions. So it is a very high-level bracket, even though it's only 4 teams. But with the early success of Purdue, I expect them to advance to the championship here, and I think they'll take on an Ole Miss team, which right now doesn't look that great, but I think by conference play, with Chris Beard at the helm, they're going to be playing at a high level. So I have Purdue and Ole Miss in the championship of this, and with the way Purdue looked against Alabama this past week, I've got to go with the Boilermakers to win the Rady Children's Invitational over the Ole Miss Rebels in that one. Okay, so to review, the 10 teams that I believe will come out with holiday tournament championships: at the Charleston Classic, the Miami Hurricanes; at the UGK Legends Classic, the Texas Tech Red Raiders; at the Baja Mar Hoops Classic, the Baylor Bears; at the Greenbrier Tip-Off, the Wisconsin Badgers; at the Maui Invitational, the Yukon Huskies, at the Fort Myers Tip-Off, the Michigan Wolverines, at the Players Era Festival, the Creighton Blue Jays, at the Battle for Atlantis, the Gonzaga Bulldogs, at the ESPN Events Invitational, the Florida Gators, and at the Rady Children's Invitational, the Purdue Boilermakers. So you'll have to test me, and we'll come back after the Holiday Hoops tournaments and see how well I did. But those are my predictions. I'd love to hear your predictions and who you think will be the champions in each of those Holiday Hoops tournaments. It's a great time of year. Enjoy Thanksgiving, enjoy the turkey, sit back and enjoy the hoops, and I will come back after Thanksgiving with more in the college basketball world. Thank you for listening to the Press Play Podcast Network. To follow us on X, look up Press Play Pods. For sponsorship plans and more information, please email admin@pressplaypodcast.com. And to listen to all our shows and learn more about our network, please visit www.pressplaypodcasts.com.